For the first time ever, Muprov Musings has fully missed a week. Last time we missed a week, we at least posted one thing, but this time we fully missed a week. But we had a really good reason for it. I've done 30 hours of improv in the last 3 days. And that is because of something very special that you're about to hear about in the episode that we did record last week, but forgot to post in all of the piles of improv admin to do. And for those who are sad to have missed an episode, you're about to be repaid with the juiciest of spoils, because next Monday we will be posting the first ever live episode of Muprov Musings. And it's already been recorded, and it's really, 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 really good. So this is a message from the sleepy, 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 sleepy host who's just finished up doing something kind of crazy that you're about to hear about from my past self before I knew how it would go, when all I could think about was my piles and piles and piles of improv admin.
We're about to put on a show, and you realize that there were no chairs.
I would probably cut the cast size down by 2 improvisers and have those 2 improvisers curl up into a ball. We draw straws to see who were the chairs.
True.
Julian, if a bagel store said that they would let you put on a show in their bagel shop, but you had to make sure that a certain number of bagels were bought that day, how would you go about producing that show?
First off, the like branding would all be the hungry yummy bagel show, and I would make sure everybody who's coming knows that there's going to be delicious little bagels. And then I would have a pre-show opening where the person who bid the most bagels would be able to give the suggestion for the show.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Muprov Musings. This is episode 41. I'm one of your hosts, Hal Munger, and joining me now on the line is your other host, Julian Bernardo.
Howdy ho, everybody. I hope you're doing well. There's no joke, there's no gaff, there's no goof to it, because we all need some love and some tenderness right now. We're excited. Am I right?
Yeah, we are.
I think we're hyped because something awesome is going to happen.
It might be the first time that you'll ever get to hear the live resonance of 2 sound waves of ours intersecting in real time.
Yeah, right now you're getting some digital AI mumbo jumbo crabble dabble of the both of us going into your ears via computer magic, but we're going to coexist.
Mm-hmm. And pretty much exactly 1 week after you hear this, potentially shorter depending on when you do, if you can get on a plane or live in New York City and wind your butt over to New York City and see a live Muprov Musings show in a theater.
Yeah, we exist IRL. What is give the deets? Give the deets to all of us, because I don't think I actually know what any of this is called.
Yeah, so the broader picture thing is called the Unscripted Shakespeare Festival. It's going to be a 4-day festival in New York City. It's kicking off Friday night with a show by Thorn and Pedalstick, an improv group that I started in New York that's Improv Shakespeare, going into a 2-hour-long jam where anyone in the audience is welcome to come up and play and build a giant Shakespearean show together that's led by Michael Bird. Then for the next 3 days, that's Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. It's Memorial Day weekend, so Monday's off. From 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. and then from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. on each of those days, That's 18 hours worth of improv workshops taught by various people, including myself and Julian, uh, and other people who are also great, all vaguely related to Shakespeare and improvising in Shakespeare, although that can be a loose connection. Uh, and then every night there's going to be another like 3 or so hours of shows, jams, etc. And one of those shows is going to be a Muprov Musings 2-person Shakespeare run.
Yeah, you might have heard the Robo AI version of this on YouTube, but we're gonna do it IRL. And this is how we came up improvising together. Obviously, we started in person, although we did have a brief foray on Zoom. Uh, so it's gonna be a lot of fun. I'm super excited to play with you, Hal. It's been too long. I would also add that like the Shakespeare aspect of the festival, and you can correct me, but you should think of it as an additive, not as a negative. Like I think that a lot of the skills that you could learn in various workshops would add to all of your other improv. And if the Shakespeare thing excites you, like yeah, that's awesome. Then you should be more into it, but you shouldn't be less into it because of the Shakespeare.
True. I feel like universally one of the things I hear from people who start doing improv Shakespeare is like, whoa, like I'm using this in my normal improv.
Yeah, it sounds so specific, right? Doing improvised Shakespeare, but truly, yeah, I totally agree that it levels you up on a lot of aspects that are key.
But as you might imagine, organizing a festival has been a freaking whirlwind. So we're going to keep the podcast episode kind of short this week, and we're going to specifically be talking about improv admin and maybe even doing some improv admin on the podcast. I heard an episode of the Improv Chronicle podcast that was on improv admin. I was like, that's a great topic, because if you think about it, like I would say in terms of improv skills to build, about if you're trying to put on a good show, I think about 10% of what's going to make the show good is like your personal skill, maybe less.
Yeah.
Like improvising. And then like 40 to 50%, maybe 60% is like how good you are at finding other people to play with, or like helping other people play well, or like have time to. And then the last like 40% is how good your admin skills are.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of the boring part, right? Improv admin, because people want to think about improv as, should all be spontaneous, should all be this, should all be that. But putting in the work in this way is very helpful. Although I would say some of the stuff we will talk about today implies that having some of that improv earned flexibility can help with your admin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I don't know want to speak to other people. I'm like terrible at admin generally. And if you're listening, you're like, what's admin? This is basically just all the logistical work that goes into making improv events writ large happen. And it's like any of the other improv skills, a skill that you can build up over time, and that I've brute forced my way into being slightly better at. But still takes a lot of it's not my natural way of operating, so it's a fun thing to learn.
Yeah, and look, this is free form. I don't know exactly what we're going to talk about here, but I would say so. I did a lot of the improv admin for our college group across a couple of years, but I feel like it largely goes into like logistics and like people management as like two key things that are a bit different, but definitely overlap. And yeah, I mean, should we just start talking about some of the things that are difficult?
Yeah, I think so. That's a good break. Would you rather start with logistics or people management?
I think logistics.
Yeah. All right. So who, what, where, when, why? Where? Let's start with the where.
Right.
How do you get spaces to put on shows? If you are scrumdiddly bum bum and you're not associated with some giant theater or whatever, what are your lines of defense?
Yeah, I mean, you helped me out here. A lot of shows, can happen at some rented space. A lot of the shows that I have been doing, or all of the shows that I have been doing in Michigan, have been at one of two kind of performing art spaces that are not owned by any improv theater, but are just rented by the theater that I perform with. And so that's a money and an availability thing where, scope out. Like, I think it's nice for us that they are performing art spaces. So they have kind of setups for lights and whatnot. Um, but in general, like rented spaces is one big concept.
Yeah. So if you have an audience that is willing to pay for tickets, you can at zero cost, besides the startup of like needing to have capital to start it, you can you can put on shows. And so basically, if you have like a skill at improv and have repeatedly demonstrated that to different people to the point where people are willing to come out to see it, that's one option. What about if you need your show to cost zero?
You need your show to cost zero. Two things come to mind. I'll throw the one that I'm more confident is real first, which is I think a lot of improv happens with quote unquote indie teams who will end up performing with some larger theater. So, you don't have to be a part of the house team of this larger theater, but often these theaters will be putting on shows and putting out calls for indie teams basically to perform. So that's, I think, another big avenue to look at.
Mm-hmm. And with that, a lot of people, I think, and part of we talked about this in the first episode of the way the world's limitations affect the sort of art and the prov of it all, is that a lot of indie teams wind up doing very short sets
Mm-hmm.
and combining with like five other indie teams, and like the whole audience is like the other teams who are playing, which is a funny business model to say the least. But that's so one way you can do it is by shortening your set. So you're still in a theater, but now you're splitting the cost of that theater with a bunch of other people. But if you want to do Muprov and you're looking for an hour, what's another strat?
Well, I'll throw this back at you because I'm coming up a little bit blank. I don't know if this is the thing that you're referring to, but you've performed at like pub kind of spaces before, right? Pub slash bar slash that kind of thing.
That is true. I wasn't organizing that. That was another member of the group was booking those gigs. But there are some restaurant, pub, establishment kind of things that host shows, and you can also potentially reach out to if there's a place that has a back room or something like that, and you think you can pull people into the establishment. Like that's a great thing to reach out to. I would say broader wise, if there's any organization or establishment that you have any connection to that has space, like I know that the RTW Kids Show last summer, I think, was in some sort of church chapel space
Mm-hmm.
that was like a local sort of community center. And yeah, I think that there are just lots of, and then like you can literally do it like potentially, in someone's like home or like depending if you have a very small audience, or if there's like I think parks are another big one. I just was trying to get a New York's park grant, and you're not a grant, like
Like a license
permission.
or yeah.
You need to kind of apply at the right time to get it. So you want to be almost like, if you want to really pick, you want to be like a year ahead. Otherwise, it's like a couple weeks ahead. Um, but yeah, I think that if you're willing to start out building your audience with small audiences, like outdoor spaces, free spaces, yeah, kind of jungled, and especially for practice, if it's spring or summer, like that's
Yeah.
just
Yeah, like this is a big point that certainly us doing a lot of our earlier improv on a college campus, there were opportunities like this, but this is a major point. You do not have to rehearse in some sort of performance space, anything like that, and you also don't necessarily have to perform in a performance space. Like expand your mind to other places where you could literally just have chairs and people and space. And that is like one of the beauties of improv, right? And perhaps a reason that uh, these things feel more like unorthodox is because a lot of other performance type events are going to require like greater tech or like setup capabilities. But improv, like you can truly just do it wherever.
and it's funny because I think like improv has become something that's like very expensive. In most cities where you go to, if you see the improv classes listed, it's like quite pricey, and the theater itself also doesn't really seem to be making that much money. So it's like a dual wielded. But in theory, it should be like the kind of like one of the cheapest possible art forms because you can do it literally anywhere with any materials. Like my high school teacher, who I look up to a lot, got really good because they were on like or one of their friends was on a night shift at a museum. So the improv group was 3 people just did this night shift and they just improvised in a museum all night.
You know what I'm thinking about right now.
Night at the museum.
Uh, yeah, there's most likely more aware stuff, and I think that this will intersect with it. But let me throw into our little pot right now one of the other W's, which is when. Uh, this is like a question that usually gets like settled kind of quickly, but I feel like I have been part of some kind of fervent debates on this when question for shows in the past.
Yeah, I've been totally. So for context on the Unscripted Shakespeare Festival, and I'll report back to let you know how it works and whether it's entirely empty or whether it totally works. But from ideation to completion, it's 1 month process, which I think is a crazy way to do a festival, especially if you're the only person or like the primary person doing the organizational for it. But I think one of the biggest things about when is like how far in the future.
Mm.
And like how much time do you need to actually build up an audience? There are several things about how this festival works that I think will provide an audience in some ways, particularly in that if we can fill the workshops, the people from the workshops will probably see the shows and etc. But ideally, it's like a fair amount in the future and not on the one weekend where the most people in New York leave the city. That was a little silly. Memorial Day weekend was a funny choice.
And let's even zoom in more micro, like when in terms of like weekdays, when in terms of like literal times. Do you think that that is important, uh, or is it splitting hairs of like, oh, it's you shouldn't do improv at 6 p.m., for example?
I think like if you're doing back like the things that come to mind is like we used to do a ton of back-to-back shows. We do like 10 back-to-back shows in a weekend or something like that. And the good news about that is you get like 10 hours of improv practice. So it's really good for mega upping your skill. And the bad news of that is you get a much smaller audience because, your friends come to 2 of the shows, but they don't come to 10 of the shows. I think that's awesome. And then the other thing that I can think of is for a new play practices, we had more blocks scheduled to practice per week than we actually had practices. And at the beginning of the week, we would see if anyone had any like hard conflicts and intentionally. So you had to have these like 4 time blocks free every week. But if you did have like a wedding or a funeral or something went really wrong, you at the beginning of the week could be like, hey, can we use these 3 of the 4 blocks that we have scheduled instead of these 3? And that maximizes for people because improv people are flaky. They're super flaky. So having 2 possible time blocks each week and being like, all right, which one can the most people come to is an interesting strategy to avoid that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That the when is definitely important. Yeah, in our in our doctrine that we follow improvisationally, there's definitely some focus on showing up on time and whatnot. And as an organizer, I definitely like even if there was no reason to, like when planning a show, I just wanted to be at the place where the show was happening as early as possible on that day, like once I was like free of my other things, because invariably I feel like when you're setting up a show there is just something to do, like it is space filling. If you show up there at 4 p.m. and the show is at 9 p.m., like you will probably find things to be doing for that whole time. So showing up early is also encouraged.
I agree. What about the what? So this falling into this category, I would say is like practice planning, like what your show is actually going to be, who's going to direct it, who like that kind of admin and how your group is going to collectively decide on that.
Yeah, this is one where I don't even know if we lie in the same place here. I think organizationally and logistically, it is easiest if there is like some early planning stage and picking stage that is like um that is done. And in particular, I would say I'm for a smaller subset of people making these kinds of decisions. I'm a little bit fearful of like over democratization, especially with something like improv, where probably everything will be fine, and sometimes letting everybody in to like maybe cast a vote or something like that may leave people a little bit more ruffled than had you just told them, oh, this is what it's going to be. However, I certainly imagine that there are counters to that. So yeah, I like deciding things early beforehand and being pretty forward about telling people this is what's happening to avoid any like, oh, I think this should be happening instead. Because yeah, I do think that improv is one of those art forms that it'll probably almost surely be fine. And if it's like better for us to be on the same page and like oscillating at the same frequency about something than for us to try to like nitpick and micro decision our way into the thing itself being the right choice.
Hmm. And hopefully you can like structure it. Like I love if like we used to make it so that if you came to more practices, you got to play more shows.
Mm-hmm.
If you are doing a ton of admin work for the group, you get to make more of the decisions. So like even just like convincing someone to be like, oh, you do the finances of the group in exchange, like you keep track of everything, do receipts and everything. Like in exchange, you get to like cast a vote in these settings, and like having a way so that if you are part of the group and you want to like have a say in these things, like there is a path for you to do that, but involves just like caring more, taking on more of that responsibility, and that also rewards the people who do that. And makes it so the people who don't want to do any improv admin are like, oh no, I can just show up, and it might not be exactly what I want, but it's. But I want to dig a little deeper into the what, because Julian, you're teaching a workshop, and I think we should advertise it on this podcast. It's going to be awesome. We're
Yeah.
teaching two actually. One of them's on combat. It's on Sunday morning. It's going to be great. I wouldn't worry about that. Julian knows his stuff. But the other one, I kind of sprung on Julian. I wrote the description of the workshop for Julian, and I was just like, Julian, you're teaching this. So we could plan out a little bit of how you're going to do it on the podcast if you want.
Yeah. That honestly, I think that that's super instructive is getting this live thinking through of what it may be. What did you write in the description?
That's a great question. Pause.
Oh,
Okay, I kept it short and sweet. It says Julian Bernardo is known for his horror improv and has directed many improvised slasher movies. Now he is bringing that horror expertise to the Shakespeare setting to bring a gut-busting (parentheses literally) tragedy to the stage with this one-day form intensive.
awesome. Cool. I didn't know that was the angle, but I love that angle. You're right. Yeah, tragedy. So like immediately think how long is this workshop?
6 hours.
6 hours. Yeah, okay. So that's meaty. That's enough to like for the other workshop, we need not get too deep into it, but my thought was like preparing the people in the workshop for by the end of the workshop being able to pull off a specific like kind of scene. Like that's what I thought was an appropriate scope for like a 3 hour workshop. And so a
For
six
this, you're going to have a 30-minute showcase.
cool. So 6 hour workshop, 30-minute showcase. Cool. So since there is a showcase for this workshop, that immediately like makes a lot of the decisions in terms of what the workshop is going to be, right? By the end of it, people need to be ready to do a show, and probably at the very least, like at the end of the workshop slot, do one run and talk about it, which probably blocks off, around the final hour or so of the whole shebang. You said 30-minute showcase?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, immediately, especially given the way that it's being marketed and drawing on my thoughts from other things, like getting people to play with being scared on stage and being scary on stage is the big thing that comes to mind, and imparting on the players that like you can create like I guess, given that it's a tragedy, it's not as much in this slasher genre, but you can create like the big negative emotions, not from the thing happening, not from, the guy killing everybody in the room, right? But, the person who remains like reacting to all of this as like a big conceptual point that immediately springs to mind as something that should get imparted. Um, I don't know how you think about workshops and like planning rehearsals and that kind of stuff, but I tend to go concept backwards of like, this is the end goal that I want them to be able to do. Therefore, what scaffolds them up to that uh, is like the general guiding principle that I have.
Yeah, for me, I think often what do I want them to learn? What exercises can isolate that? And then also how can I best break apart the time block? So like if I
Mm-hmm.
was tackling your workshop, which probably we'll go back and forth on this as well, I would start off quickly trying to make it so that people could learn the Shakespearean texture.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I wouldn't really focus on grammar because I don't think that that's something that you already like are super into.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, I would focus on this idea of like metaphor and saying things in big ways and having large emotional reactions,
Mm-hmm.
and the sort of old timiness, and then like ideally balance. And I think that those Shakespeare exercises are just so fun of the metaphor circles and the O balls and that kind of stuff. Listen to the Shakespeare show if you're missing that. Um, and then balancing that with this sort of more kind of horror texture. And then probably I would reverse engineer some tragedy Shakespeare shows. I'm not going to make you do that, but if you want, I can go over with that with you at another time. But they're often a little more uh, protagonist-y in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, like Hamlet, Macbeth, Othello. Like a lot of times it's the name of the tragic person. Antony and Cleopatra, Romeo and Juliet, and then uh, like just sort of working out when people start dying, and it probably would be worth spending some time like just dying in fun ways because a lot of what you're going to do narratively is everybody dies,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and you just have that as an ending automatically. So the it kind of simplifies things, and that's why I think it works really well as a 1 day workshop. Is fun texture, can't be interactions. Everybody dies.
Yeah. 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 Uh, I think this is like something that I became more like adamant about when doing like the less campy kind of horror stuff. But something I do think is big for this too is like playing in the way where everything that you as a like person see happen, like your improviser sees happen. Like if we want to create, any level of tension, well, because I'm sure the campiness will be created naturally. Uh, if we want to create any level of tension, I think one of the biggest tension breaking things in improv is when like we know that the player like sees something but is like pretending not to see it because they need to like wait for something else to happen before they react to it. But trying to get people to play in that way of literally everything that they see as a person is what their character sees. I think is big. This happens a lot of time with like dead bodies in improv, right? You walk into a room, or you walk on stage basically, and you as an improviser obviously see like the dead body right there, but you'll play with it a little bit. And I guess Shakespeare there's a little looser reality where that would be less like reality breaking, but I don't know. That's just what I'm ideating on.
All
What you
right.
see is what you get.
Yeah, and listeners, don't like panic if you hear this and are like, "Oh my God, this is going to be like the most disorganized." Like this is going to be a great workshop. Julian's going to think it through a lot. If he doesn't, I would think it through and send a bunch of stuff his way, like the day, but like
Yeah.
it's going to work out. But I think usually what I try to think about is like I often spend a comparable amount of time to the workshop itself, planning the workshop.
Yeah.
Uh, so if it was a 6 hour workshop, I'd probably spend about 6 hours on it. But the flip side of that is like, uh, for a 6-hour workshop, like, an hour of it is probably doing 2 runs of the show or something like that. So you can, shave off that time. So, maybe it takes 4 hours to plan because certain parts instantly get, but it's going to be a lot of fun. And I just can tell you're going to put on a great show. So I would be super excited if I was in New York and knew that I could do Joanne's tragedy workshop.
Yeah, look, New York, I've heard it's a big city. I bet someone listening can come do my workshop. Come do my workshop. Come do my workshop. It's going to be so good.
Yeah, I wish I could take it, honestly. I wish I could take it, wish I could teach it, wish I could just be in the room where it happens.
Yeah.
I can watch it, and I will. All right. And then the last one, we said we were going to do a short episode. Now I feel like it's become a normal length episode. But the Who, this is the people management side of things.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that this is the hardest, and this is the one that I probably struggle with the most. I guess what are situations where, like, quote unquote people management is needed in the very micro, like thinking about planning a workshop. You should probably come in with an idea of how heavily you're going to side coach things, and that might just be something that like a way that you just always operate, so you don't need to set it for each workshop. But I think it's good to reevaluate going into any sort of thing like this, like how important is it to side pick, very nitpicky things versus just try to make sure they get the larger point of it.
Yeah. And like also how they're doing emotionally in the like workshop. Like if I were you teaching the 1-day workshop, I wouldn't probably end with the full run of the show because you potentially want to have like an emotional. I would probably end with some sort of unity togetherness thing.
Totally.
Because you're doing the show that night. And I certainly, for the last 3-hour block of the workshop that I'm planning, which is 18 hours, we're just going to be doing things that are almost entirely about that sort of mental side of the game. And I think when I was directing a new play, I really missed on a lot of that stuff. And I've learned a lot more about, I feel like as a director or a coach or just anybody involved, like most of what decides whether or not a show is going to be good, and especially how you feel about the show afterwards, is kind of like the mood that everybody goes into the show with. And so like a huge amount of it is like emotional, like just support. And I've been working a lot on like phrasing things in a way that is kind and reminding, like highlighting what's fun. And like, I learned this a lot of the preschool of like, there are some days where everybody gets tense and it gets into this kind of cycle and then the kids start getting crazy. And there are people who can be these kind of like emotional circuit breakers where that tension is rising. Someone comes in and just like calms the energy. And like a lot of times if people are getting a little more like feeling like, oh, this is too challenging, like pausing and being silly for a little bit and doing some sort of improv, or if everyone's like too silly and distracted, like, taking a moment to do some like breathing exercises and then get back into the swing of things.
Yeah, I mean, is that not one of the great affordances of what we do, is that we should be, at least conceptually, happy with changing course if the plan that we have on the paper is not working in a certain way. And I think that as a result, like it is our duty to make sure we do change course if something's coming up. Yeah, I think some tools, for the Who that are helpful are, sometimes it's helpful or it's certainly helpful to often have space in front of everybody to air things, but then also splitting up into, everyone goes in a pair, or just this general kind of individualizing time is good so that you can go up to specific people if you're like, oh, like I don't know if that person like felt good about that hit that happened in that other scene. Maybe it's definitely better to address something like that in a more one-on-one setting as opposed to in front of everybody.
That's very true. So yeah, because you want to make sure that there is yeah, both avenues
Yeah. And I think with the Who, something that I take in part of my doctrine is like a strong adherence to the fake it till you make it thing of our college improv group, it's called the Simps, and one of the oft repeated phrases was like Simps doesn't miss, Simps can't miss, and going into it, if you are the director or the person who's planning some sort of showcase with that mentality and like kind of literally always saying this, I think is the optimal routine. I don't think that I'm hard pressed to imagine a situation where uh like the director offering uncertainty about whether the show is like going to be good will be helpful to the players right before the show, at least. Certainly like there's space, and I love it when the people who are instructing me in improv in the like building block stages are like, we need to work more on this, and signal the things that we're not good at yet. But by the end of it, no matter if they improved on that thing or not, I think it is like always better to just act like the show is going to be great.
and the Sims never missed. It was true. We went and killed every time. Part of that was also the Who of like, auditions, which we're not going to get into, but like doing that well and curating a really good group of people. I think classes, like, sure, they're okay to learn, but they're not like the most efficient way to learn in terms of like how much you have to pay and how little per week they meet.
Mhm.
But um, they're a great way to meet other improvisers that you don't know yet, as are jams or whatever. So if you build up that skill of being able to tell who in scenes is doing support work and who is like who you want to be playing with, and then being able to reach out to those people and have them play, and then also finding people who can consistently come to things and commit, and are fun to be around that are your friends.
A minor kind of thing that I always think about, and I've like flip flopped on how I do it, but when you're running something, how intentional are you about who goes up for a given exercise or scene? Is that something that you try to call yourself, or you just let it you work itself out among the players?
I think if you do nothing about it, oftentimes like gender and occasionally racial like biases come out in society. Like oftentimes people who have a lot of privilege in society generally are feel more confident, comfortable, like taking up the space and jumping up to play first and X, Y, or Z. So if you have time and you're teaching a longer class, I almost always start with space and tracking it through various space tracking games and getting people used to this idea of like sharing spaces of an improv skill. But if you don't have time for that, then I would say that making it so your exercises involve everybody going and potentially even randomizing the order. So it's not the same people going first every time, and setting the example of how the exercise is done, I think is a powerful tool.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with pretty much everything that you said. Yeah, keep an eye on that, I think is the main note.
What about Julian in terms of who of like to include versus to exclude, or like
Yeah.
uh how do you balance the desire to have like small versus large, and how do you, without getting too deep into the weeds of auditions, of like uh what do you think of, where do you think person curation comes into play in improv?
Yeah, I mean it's huge. I think it's vital, and like I think often like 75% of the show is maybe probably more is just determined by the who of it. No matter how the rehearsals are gonna go. I think I tend to be if you have to put me on one side of the spectrum, more exclusionary. AKA, and the way that I would phrase it is I tend to want to like foster a particular kind of environment. And so, there's many things that you consider when picking like who's going to be part of a show or something like this. One of the big and most basic things that is complicated is just like what level of skill variance are you comfortable with? The experience that, Hal and I had in college, it definitely had a different connotation around it where we were picking people to be in a group. And so there was a big idea of like growth and fostering young people who are going to, later be good instead of just 100% valuing how someone would perform if they just had to go in a show that day. Uh, and yeah, I mean, it's tough, and I think it certainly is just a function of what you're picking people for, like a one like a run of shows versus being in a group versus anywhere along that spectrum.
Yeah. I often lean towards like uh and this can have its own societal issues or whatever of like who has the most free time or whatever, but uh if you can raise the amount of like practice required for something, you can often lower the amount that you have to be like, oh no, you can't do it because if you practice 10 times before the show, even if you had no improv experience, by the end of it you'd have 10 practices worth of improv experience before performing. And that also like narrows down how many people would want to do it. So sometimes you can do it that way, and then also like one thing that I'm interested in trying out, like instead of doing an audition, just like often invite people to guest in your shows, like have one guest slot that you
Yeah.
just use a lot of, like, okay, come to a couple practices, guest in the show. There's no like you're going to get into the group if you do this at all, if like, or this is an audition or whatever. But then you build up a thing of like, oh, this person has guested in the show 3 times or whatever, like and now this person left the group, maybe we should just ask this person, which it can have its own problems, and I think it's cool to have it. But the other thing is actually teaching the workshops is a big part of why I love to teach. A big part of why I'm doing this festival is giving people an accessible lane that doesn't have a barrier to entry to learn all the skills.
Yeah.
And providing that for the people in your community, I think is like pretty essential to making something that is inclusive.
Yeah. And we talk so much about like, oh, how are we going to pick these people, yada, yada, yada. But so much of it, like you're never going to fully know off of like an audition, for example, how someone is. So both increasing the amount of people you see and increasing like the different contexts that you see potential people to play with is going to let you just pick people better, basically.
That's true. That's true. And yeah, a lot of people try to maximize on quantity rather than like quality of people, especially when it comes to audiences. Which it makes sense why people want like a full audience. But I think if you're willing to have a smaller audience, you gain so much like equity in every other avenue that you can explore artistically. So that's something that I always think about as well.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're teaching, like my favorite size of a class to teach is like 2 or 3. Like obviously you want to teach more for like, logistical reasons, but you get the most out of that for a smaller number of students.
Yeah. Yeah. Certain like you got to think about when thinking about like picking how big a show is going to be, for example. Often I find myself thinking about, oh, like for the show itself, what is going to be good, like in terms of a number of people, like like what works with this format. But the huge unspoken thing is like you're dividing your rehearsal time basically by n, where n is the number of people. It's more complicated, I guess. There's typically more than one person in a scene, but just the more people, the more time people are going to be sitting there watching other people, which that does have value and it also needs to be considered. But keeping it small for just rehearsal space and attention is huge.
Yeah. All right. Well, so we've been through a lot of the admin, and I feel like the last thing is this kind of do it yourself mentality that we're putting forth on the podcast. Like for the Unscripted Shakespeare Festival, I applied to teach 2-day Shakespeare, or maybe it was 1 day, I don't remember, workshop at another festival that existed. I didn't get it. And I was feeling bummed. I was like, how am I supposed to build up a resume of like having taught at a bunch of festivals without having because I feel like I'm totally, I could build a great workshop that people would really participate in, would put on a great show. But if I'm applying to, and I was like, well, why don't I looked at the website of a couple of festivals, and I was like, well, this doesn't look that hard. I think I slightly underestimated it in terms of this has been a really admin intense past couple of weeks, and having a bigger runway before the expected date would have been really helpful. But honestly, I'm so excited for this festival. I think it's going to be awesome, and I think it's actually going to be landing the plane with the duct tape wings or whatever. I think it's going to be like phenomenal, and I really hope if people go back who participated in the festival, if anyone goes back and listens to this episode of the podcast, they're like, this is unhinged. And like, I hope it ended up going really well, and that they're like, I can't believe that behind the scenes, it's this rat scrap together.
Yeah, I mean, it's how we operate as improvisers often. But yeah, it like just the bare bones facts of the matter is improv is like mostly a people thing. And so if you just get the right people in the right place, beautiful stuff can happen.
Beautiful, beautiful stuff. Yeah. So by the time you hear this, the full show schedule should be posted, the full workshop. And if you're listening to this and you got this far, please, oh my God, please, 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 if you know anyone in New York who'd want to participate in the festival, like get this to them, because it's going to be so fun. And I love the people who are teaching there, and it's just going to be like I know that literally if no one came to any of the workshops and no one came to the shows, I would definitely, financially, that would be a disaster. But yeah, interpersonally, it would be a very successful operation. And because of the jungling side of things, like I think the financials of the festival actually will work out. Like to close to break even.
Yeah, I'm sure you can tell Hal thinks a lot about improv and about improvisers, and I trust all of the choices that you've made going into this, that it's going to be the best for the improv. So yeah, double down on that sentiment. That tell anybody, come do this, come check out this festival, come sign up. If you tell them that Julian sent you, I have a pack of slap bracelets, and I'll bring them. And if you come, if you say Julian sent you, I'll give you one.
Wow, you heard it here. You heard it here. Oh, and I guess I can do the sign off. Never mind. Okay. Wow, you heard it here. You heard it here. Wow, you heard it here. You heard it here.
You heard it here.
All right. Unless you have any other improv admin based things besides forms and posters, and we could have gotten into more specifics.
Yeah.
Like maybe we'll do another admin episode that's more like or combat episode where it's like specific admin techniques.
Yeah.
But without further ado, this is Bryn.
Muprov
Musings. Oh, my sign off is this week are the best all-time downloads ever from Muprov Musings. We don't get a lot of downloads for context, but this week got massively boosted by the fact that one singular person, I'm pretty sure it's one singular person based on the statistics, in England downloaded our podcast like 200 times. I don't know how they did it. I don't know what happened, but it was consistently across the week that like every day I logged on, it would be like 30 new downloads in England, and it would say one listener. So I don't know if your computer is broken or if you just like are 24-hour binging all of Muprov Musings multiple times. But whoever you are, if you reach out to us, you can do an opener, you can do a sign off, send in a voice message. Just you're currently our number one fan by an enormous margin, and or you're like a robot.
Yeah, I mean, even if you're a robot, you probably still are our number one fan.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's awesome. We have much love for England. I wonder if you're downloading all these episodes to save on different like flash drive copies or something, such that when the world ends, you have your bunker with all the Muprov Musings episodes.
I really like the idea of like 2,000 years from now, like a totally different society.
Yeah.
Discovering a bunker in England, and the only surviving text from our era is encrypted in stone. Improv Musings, episodes 1 through 40.
Yep, they might have to reinvent the steam engine, all of this, but you will not have to reinvent Muprov. It will persist.
Gosh, I'm trying to think, which concepts do you think we would be the most helpful in rebuilding from across all our episodes, non-improv? Because
And Shakespeare. Oh yeah, we talked so much about Shakespeare.
Can't you see
the bard will not be lost.
like you always?
I think we would be helpful in cross-checking facts about media. I think that's probably the biggest, like, outside of improv thing we do is like make reference to how narratives work in like movies or TV. And so if like a slightly cracked CD or DVD of Shrek is found in the future, you might be able to fill in like scenes 2 through 9 with some knowledge that we impart when we're talking about how to introduce a villain or something.
And the other thing is, like, sometimes people write stories, like, there's a reference to some lost poem in another poem. People like write, the alternate version. So maybe someone 2,000 years from now would make a version of Cars.
Most likely.
I'm really sure what it's about. I know there's someone called Lightning McQueen. Maybe they're an actual lightning bolt. Maybe they're an actual queen.
I guess you would reinvent the hero's journey.
Yeah.
Oh, can't you see me now? Can't you see me now? Like you did back then. Can't you see me now? I remember way back when. Oh, and times they are changing. Things are rearranging. Can't you see me now? Can't you see me now? Everything is changing. Can't you see me now? Can't you see me now?